Is Vladimir Putin planning to attack NATO? It seemed impossible last year. Ukraine alone was a handful for the Russian army. But now new reports have emerged, new statements from Russia. They say Putin will target NATO's soft underbelly, the so-called Achilles heel. And where exactly is that? Let me pull up the map for you. You can see Russia, Belarus, Poland and the Baltic states. Now focus on this land between Poland and Lithuania. It's called Kaliningrad. This is Russian territory, Kaliningrad. Moscow took this land from Nazi Germany during the Second World War. And since then, it's been theirs. Now, Kaliningrad is surrounded by two NATO states, Poland and Lithuania. But there is a land bridge to Russia's ally, Belarus. This land bridge has a name, the Suwalki Gap or the Suwalki Corridor. It's around 100 kilometers long. It's sparsely populated, but it's NATO territory. The Suwalki Gap is shared by Poland and Lithuania. It's been called many things. The most dangerous place on earth, NATO's soft underbelly, and NATO's Achilles heel. But why would Putin attack it? Well, for strategic reasons. The Suwalki Gap is the only way to go from Poland to the Baltics, the only land route. If you take that, you can cut off the Baltic states. 3 NATO nations would be isolated from their allies. That's Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia. So simply put, it's a choke point. Now, if you're watching us from India, this may sound familiar to you. India too has a choke point. This one, called the Siliguri Corridor, also called the Chicken's Neck. This corridor connects India to the northeastern states. What Siliguri is to India, Suwalki is to NATO. But coming back to Putin, what's his plan of action? The Kremlin itself has not said anything, but Russian parliamentarians explained how it would unfold. No Russian soldiers will be used in this operation. Instead, Wagner mercenaries from Belarus will engage. I know it sounds confusing. Didn't Wagner rebel against Putin just recently? Well, this Russian lawmaker claims it was all part of the plan. Wagner would rebel, their fighters would be exiled to Belarus, and once there, they would train. Satellite images show new military camps have popped up in the country in Belarus. Hundreds of Wagner fighters have started moving in. Reports say they could take the Suwalki Gap in hours. The question is, will Putin give the order? Suwalki is still NATO territory. An attack on this area would trigger Article 5 of NATO. What is Article 5? It says an attack on one member is an attack on all NATO members, meaning NATO would be at war with Russia officially. Will Putin risk that? Let's play the devil's advocate for a bit. Russia has a lot of military muscle in Kaliningrad. Tens of thousands of soldiers, nuclear missiles, also the Baltic naval fleet. On the other side, in Belarus, you have the Wagner fighters. So Russia could easily swoop in from the east and west. They did something similar in Ukraine, remember. After invading, Russian troops made a beeline for Crimea. They created a land bridge between Crimea and the Russian-held land. So taking Suwalki would be easy, but holding on to it, that will be much tougher. NATO has been preparing plans to defend against Russia. They've dusted out old plans from the Cold War, so chances are they have mapped this eventuality, they've mapped it out. Plus, it's not uncommon for countries to prepare such attack plans. Not to use them, but just as backup. So perhaps this Suwalki plan is something similar. Logic says Putin will not use it. His attention is pretty much on Ukraine right now. He's pounding Ukrainian cities with airstrikes. The latest was on Odessa. This is a port city in southern Ukraine, Odessa. It was hit by 2 consecutive nights of airstrikes. Take a look at the damage. Entire buildings have been destroyed. Even the port of Odessa was hit. Russia is calling this revenge strikes. Retaliation for the Crimean bridge attack earlier this week. Now, targeting the port was not a coincidence, by the way. Russia pulled out of the Black Sea grain deal this week. It says Ukraine is using the Black Sea for combat, hence the attack on Odessa. And the whole world should be concerned about this. Ukraine makes up around 9% of all wheat exports, global wheat exports. If the port of Odessa is destroyed, that trade stops. So food prices could go up. President Zelensky says Russia is doing this on purpose and that Putin is weaponizing food.
Obviously, the Russian leadership is now trying to provoke these crises. Without our exports, the deficit on the global market will unfortunately be very noticeable. And not only for the poorest countries. Different countries will feel it, from Libya and Egypt to Bangladesh and China.
So Russia is on the offensive and so is Ukraine. Take a look at these pictures. They show how Ukraine is hitting Russian positions in the east. Those are Grad rockets. They're part of Kiev's much-hyped counter-offensive. It's been slow and costly, but Ukraine says this too is part of the plan. Apparently, they're going slow to avoid casualties. But how long will this continue? How long can this continue? Russia's strategy is to wear down Ukraine and NATO. If NATO stops giving weapons, Ukraine will fold. No two ways about it. And Washington knows this. The Pentagon chief, Lloyd Austin, says this is not the time to slow down.
As we saw again today, this contact group stands united behind them. Today, we recommitted to supporting Ukraine during its crucial counteroffensive and for the long haul. And this is no time to slow down.
So I guess that's that. 17 months on, things have gone from bad to worse. Food grain is stuck at Ukrainian ports. Cities are being pounded with little impact on the front line. And there are concerns of an attack on NATO. Maybe Russia and Ukraine are not losing this war, but their people certainly are. Meanwhile, in China, the foreign minister is still missing. The foreign minister of the country, nowhere to be found. Over 3 weeks and counting, Qin Gang has not returned to office. So where did he go? Beijing won't say, and their response is fueling speculation. China is being very cagey about this. First, they said Qin Gang was unwell. Then they went completely silent. And now they say the government has, quote unquote, no information to provide, no health updates, no whereabouts, not even saying if he is better or not. So is Qin Gang very sick, or has he just disappeared? Which is completely normal in China. It's a completely normal thing to happen in China. People disappear all the time. But this time, it's a very senior government official. Qin Gang is the foreign minister of the country, of the world's second biggest economy and a rising global power. He can't just go off the radar, and yet he has. When this happens anywhere in the world, it's usually bad news. When this happens in China, it's certainly bad news, most likely a crackdown. Now, let me repeat and underscore this. There is no official word from Beijing. This is largely informed speculation, as you would call it. The rumor mills are churning. They say the Chinese foreign minister is being punished for an affair, a love affair. He is being linked to this woman, Fu Xiaotian. She's a television anchor, and if reports are to be believed, Fu too has gone missing. Again, no confirmation from Beijing, but on social media, some videos are going viral. This is believed to be an old interview of Qin Gang. The interviewer is Fu Xiaotian. And now there is talk of an affair. China's foreign ministry was asked about this. The spokesperson was Mao Ning. She was asked about this alleged affair, not once, but repeatedly. Listen to this.
Does the foreign ministry have any update on Foreign Minister Qin Gang and when he will return to public duties? Or why he's been out of the limelight for 3.5 weeks now? Financial Times again. The Times of London has reported that Qin Gang's disappearance is related to being under investigation for an affair with Fu Xiaotian, a Phoenix TV reporter who recently gave birth in the U.S. Do you have any comment on that?
Clearly, those questions made her quite uneasy. Now listen to her response. I am not familiar with the situation you're talking about. That's what she said. That's all that she said. Not familiar with the situation you're talking about. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When the official transcript of this conversation came out, Beijing had removed this statement. It reminds you of that phrase from Alice in Wonderland, curiouser and curiouser. China's internet censors have also been pressed into action. They're scrubbing social media. Posts with phrases like, "Where is Qin Gang?" have been taken down. But people are still asking questions. Look at this post. A Chinese netizen is discussing Qing's disappearance. He says, and I'm quoting again, "The Ministry of Foreign Affairs' press conference was silent about old Qing's whereabouts except for health factors, which inevitably makes people suspicious." So there is a lot of chatter and a lot of questions, and Beijing's silence is not helping. But here's something else you should know. Qin Gang was very close to President Xi Jinping, like a trusted lieutenant. His rise to the top was rapid. Qin used to be a protocol officer, someone who organized Xi Jinping's foreign trips. Then in 2021, he was appointed ambassador to the United States, and within 17 months, he was named foreign minister. This happened in March this year. Qin was given a very important task: to revive China's diplomatic engagements. You see, the Wuhan virus also infected China's relationship with the world. There was mistrust and bad blood. And Xi Jinping's wolf warriors made it worse. So he got Qin Gang to fix things, to engage in aggressive diplomacy, and that's what he did. He held high-profile meetings with the Americans. The goal was to resume dialogue, but the meetings turned into shouting matches. His last engagement was on the 25th of June this year. 25th of June, that's when he met diplomats from 3 countries: Vietnam, Russia, and Sri Lanka. And this was the last time he was seen in public. In the days that followed, he had more important meetings lined up. Qin was supposed to meet Joseph Borrell this month. Borrell is a top diplomat of the European Union. He was supposed to travel to China, but that meeting was postponed and no reason was given for that. Qin was also supposed to attend the ASEAN meeting in Indonesia last week, but he did not show up. Instead, his predecessor, Wang Yi, was sent. He was earlier the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi. And when he was sent to Indonesia, that's when China said, Qin is sick. But the alibi is not working anymore. Even Chinese citizens don't believe it. So now the censors are at work and the Communist Party is pulling the strings from behind because, like I said, disappearances are par for the course in China. High-profile names suddenly disappear. Speculation follows and their return is usually stage-managed by Beijing. Xi Jinping did it himself. In 2012, just before he was named president of China, Xi vanished for 2 weeks. He reappeared just before he took over, no reason given for his absence. And in the years since, many Chinese politicians, celebrities and business leaders have disappeared in similar fashion. Tennis star Peng Shuai, entrepreneur Jack Ma, former Interpol chief Meng Hongwei, film star Fan Bingbing, and recently dealmaker Bao Fan, they all disappeared without any explanation. All of them were targets of a state crackdown. And when they returned, they gave some vague stories. This time, it's the foreign minister of the country. Is Qin Gang the new target? Well, don't wait for Beijing to answer that question. So one diplomat is missing a lot of action, but a former diplomat is in the thick of it. And that too, at the age of 100. I'm talking about this man, Henry Kissinger. He is a former Secretary of State. He arrived in Beijing on Tuesday to meet Chinese officials. Many people were confused at first. They couldn't believe Kissinger was still alive. Look at what Chinese social media users were writing about this. Is this the Kissinger from the history books? I thought he was dead because people in the history books are. Well, to answer their question, yes, this is the Kissinger from China's history books. I wouldn't bet on their accuracy, though. Kissinger played a key role in establishing relations between the US and Communist China. Until the 1970s, none existed between the US and China. The US only recognized the regime in Taiwan. But in 1971, Henry Kissinger flew to Beijing. This was a top-secret visit. He met with senior Chinese officials there. He also managed to get an invite for US President Richard Nixon. The next year, in 1972, Nixon traveled to Beijing, and that's how the US and Communist China established relations. Now back to the present. Kissinger had 2 important meetings in Beijing, one with Defense Minister Li Shangfu, and the second with top diplomat Wang Yi. Now, since the foreign minister was missing, Kissinger was spared a third one. He's not in Beijing on any official mission, apparently. He's there as a private citizen, and the US has a history of doing this. They call it track 2 diplomacy. When the official channels fail, you turn to unofficial ones. Such attempts have been made with Russia as well. Retired State Department officials met Russia's foreign minister in April. That too was track 2. But does the White House know what Kissinger is up to? Here's what US officials said.
We were aware that Henry Kissinger was traveling to China. It actually came up in the meetings that Secretary Blinken had when we were in China. The Chinese officials mentioned that he was planning to come, as he has done a number of times over the years as a private citizen. I will say he was there under his own volition, not acting on behalf of the United States government, and I don't have any further updates on his trip.
So they're very much new. The White House says Kissinger usually debriefs after every visit, meaning he comes back and tells them what happened, what Chinese officials said, the sentiment in Beijing, all of it. So we can assume that he'll do the same this time. Meanwhile, the Chinese government has already released a statement. It covers Kissinger's talks with the defense minister, and this is what the American told them. I'm quoting, "History and practice have repeatedly proved that neither the US nor China can afford to treat the other as an adversary." Now listen to Li Shangfu's reply, the Chinese defense minister. This is what he said. "Some people in the United States did not meet China halfway, causing China-US relations to hover at the lowest point since the establishment of diplomatic relations." Wang Yi said something similar. He also added some sweet talk for the ex-diplomat. Listen to this. "US policy toward China requires Kissinger-style diplomatic wisdom and Nixon-style political courage." So you've heard the statements. Now let's understand what this visit is all about. In the past few weeks, top US leaders have made a beeline for China. Antony Blinken went first, then Janet Yellen. And now climate envoy John Kerry is in Beijing. China gave all of them a cold welcome. Before that, the defense minister refused to meet the Pentagon chief, Lloyd Austin, the same minister who just met Kissinger. So China was stonewalling the Americans. Washington kept trying to engage, but Beijing refused. Could Kissinger be trying to break this deadlock? Despite his age, he is the man for the job. The Chinese regime holds Kissinger in high regard. Look at these articles by their state media. Kissinger's pragmatism and rationality are what US lacks most today. At 100, Kissinger still razor sharp on China-US relations. This is what the Chinese press is saying, the state mouthpieces. China-US need a Kissinger now more than 50 years ago. This is China's state media for you. They specialize in insults and smear pieces. So coming from them, this praise tells a story. Kissinger has something in Beijing that Joe Biden's officials don't. Respect and trust. But will that be enough to repair the relationship? It's hard to say, because the China of today is not the China of 1971. It's a lot more aggressive and ambitious. Plus, the Kissinger of today is not the spring chicken of the 1970s. Most of the world considers him a war criminal. His influence within the State Department is virtually nil. So if Joe Biden is betting on a 100-year-old ex-diplomat to do the heavy lifting, good luck. Instead, he should ask himself two questions. Is China reciprocating his desire for engagement? From the looks of it, no. Do China's words of peace match its actions? Again, the answer is no. And I'm not saying stop engaging with China. Preventing a conflict should be the top priority. I'm saying limit your expectations. The China of the 1970s needed American help. The China of today needs America's downfall. So West Asia is on a spending spree, but the world's leading companies are cutting costs. This has been the year of layoffs. Thousands of workers across sectors have lost their jobs, and appraisals have not brought much cheer. So why are so many corporates in distress? Because their fundamentals are weak. Businesses around the world are staring at a massive debt pile. Let's start with the US and Europe. Companies there owe trillions of dollars in debt. I have the numbers. American and European companies owe well over $38 trillion. You heard that right, $38 trillion. For perspective, $38 trillion represents 90% of the combined GDPs of the US and Europe. So the debts are big enough to consume their entire economies. Such levels are not sustainable, and the stress is beginning to show. Corporate defaults are rising. High-profile companies are in distress. Like French supermarket chain Casino, it owes over $7 billion and it is struggling to repay. The company is holding talks with creditors. A French court is overseeing these discussions. In Britain, Thames Water is in crisis. This is the UK's biggest water supplier. It owes more than $18 billion. Last month, there was talk of a government bailout. In Sweden, there are fears of a crash in the property sector. SBB, a leading landlord, could be out of cash. Its debt has been rated as junk. In America, a similar trend is emerging. Wall Street is worried. Bad loans in the US have exceeded $500 billion. Again, these are corporate loans, and the impact is being felt across sectors in real estate, healthcare, retail, telecom, software services. How did so many companies end up here? Well, they made some bad calls. 3 years back, when the pandemic hit, when economies came to a grinding halt, governments and central banks encouraged borrowing. Loans were made available for cheap, so corporates borrowed heavily. But then inflation surged. Central banks began hiking interest rates. They wanted to drain the excess money out of their economy, so the loans became more expensive. And the result is this: interest rates are high and businesses are struggling to sustain themselves. Many have no option but to default. And what's worrying is the scale of this. Again, I have more data. This is from the United States. In the first 6 months of 2023, as many as 55 American companies defaulted, and this is a new record, 55 defaults. In 2022, just 36 companies defaulted in the entire year. Right now, we're just halfway through 2023, and more than 50 companies have already defaulted. What about the rest of the world? Globally, 81 companies defaulted in the first half of this year. Experts are worried about this trend. They fear that more companies will fail in the year ahead. Just 3.8% of the companies defaulted globally, 3.8% in the whole world. According to Moody's, this year the default rate could cross 4%. In the worst case scenario, it could cross even 13%. And this will be worse than the 2008 financial crisis. This is bad news for everyone, because if the job creators fail, the impact will be felt on a country's economy. It could trigger a recession. So what is the solution? A stable macroeconomic environment, less tinkering with interest rates. That's the demand from American banks. In the month of May, the Bank of America made an assessment. It warned about defaults worth $1 trillion if the market remains uncertain and if there is a credit crunch. This is what they said will happen. Big defaults. So should the rest of the world worry about this? It should, because the impact of defaults in the West will be felt in the developing world too. Export-dependent economies like China will face a decline in orders. Countries like India, which rely on export of services like software, may also lose business. Of course, this is a hypothetical situation right now, but the risks are clear and evident. The world has narrowly avoided a large-scale recession this year. If the corporate debt is not controlled, we may find ourselves back to square one and still dealing with a potential recession. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Turkey. Multiple wildfires are burning across the country. Military planes, emergency helicopters, and hundreds of firefighters have been deployed to deal with the situation. Meanwhile, here's an example of how not to treat animals. An Iranian man was recently filmed riding a whale shark and then dancing on top of it. This incident happened in the Persian Gulf. And in the United Kingdom, a group of skydivers has set a new record. They created the largest ever formation while free falling through the air. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1969, the Indian government nationalized 14 major commercial banks. This step was taken when Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. These banks controlled about 85% of bank deposits in the country. The economics behind the move remains debatable to this day. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Aí, bom Júlio.
News.